I ran marketing departments in corporate America for 10 years and then ran a digital agency for over another 10 years. So I know the roadmap to online success, and that formula always includes producing content to share your message, from your marketing message to sales and delivery. Hi, I'm Jennifer Neal, and you're listening to the Content Toolbox. I believe the secret to finding and creating raving fans online is through you. In building relationships through stories that share who you really are, create genuine, crazy, raving fans that keep begging you to take their money. And on this podcast, we'll be talking strategies, tactics, tips, and more with myself and other industry experts. So buckle up and start your engines, because it's go time. All right, welcome you guys to another episode of the Content Toolbox. I am thrilled today to introduce you to a friend of mine who is also an inspiration behind creating the Content Toolbox the way that we have it. So all of the resource area and the coolness that we have, you guys have to owe to our guest today, Mr. Evans Putman. Welcome, Evans.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for that. Yes, it's nice to see. I remember we spoke and I was like, it's so cool to see people actually taking something that I sort of, accidentally discovered and used and was really effective with, and then shared it with other people, and to see them using it in a way that's really awesome. And a lot of them, like yourself, are probably doing it better than I did. So, but yeah,
accidental discoveries are like the best. I love them.
Yes. Yeah. You just got to, and that's a great point, because people always ask us, how did you figure all this stuff out? It's like, because we screwed up a lot.
Yep.
and we just kept going. We had ideas and we said, okay, that's a crazy idea, but let's see if it'll work. And if it didn't work, we just said, okay, we shelved it and then went to the next thing. But that was something that a skill that I developed, because I didn't have that for much of my career until I met my client, Pat, who it was his podcast that we grew, and then we became business partners and grew that business. But he was really good at that, just giving me free reign. And we would just sit down together and just have the craziest ideas. And he's like, let's just try it. And we like, okay. I was like, but before that, it wasn't a skill that I had. It was always like, I was perfection. I got to get it perfect. And, I'm trying to hold on tight, grasp to the expectation that it's going to work. And if it didn't, then it felt like a big failure and I was sort of defeated. And now it's like, oh, whatever. I just fall down, wipe off the dirt and keep going.
Oh my gosh. So true. Yeah. I'm curious. So normally I like to ask guests to kind of give us a little bit of history, and you just jumped right in, which I love. So when you're coming up with ideas, like a little thought just popped in my head here. When you're coming up with ideas, you were sitting down with your partner at the time and you're like, okay, let's just try it. Where did some of those ideas come from? Was it following courses or guidelines or other things that people were doing or saying, or was it literally just like, I don't know, we need to do this, so let's try this?
Yeah, a lot of it came from necessity. There were two parts. Like most of the times it was necessity. Like, this isn't working. Like for us, in the fact of like the toolbox and getting email addresses, it was that when I came on board, he had a newsletter that went out, like, sign up for our newsletter. And, I always joke, one of my other partners that I've worked with over time, Parker Woodward, and I laugh about it, because in one of our interviews, I was like, nobody wants a stinking newsletter,
Right.
And it showed, because our we had a huge audience and only like one or two people would sign up a week, and then nobody would ever open it, because it was just a newsletter showing like, hey, these are the podcast episodes that came out. No real value whatsoever. So necessity would sort of bring on like, okay, we got to figure this out. But as you mentioned, I would say that probably 90% of our ideas did not just pull from, thin air. They mostly came from seeing other people doing things, and it would spark an idea. We never like copied people, but we might see, like for him, for instance, he heard another podcaster at one point mentioning, join the toolbox. But for them, the toolbox was just this thing that they sent out, and it was like a newsletter. But when we heard that word toolbox, it just sparked something. We were actually in his garage, and here's a crazy story, because in his garage, it was below his house. He lives in a beautiful island close to me, Folly Beach, South Carolina. And we would go to his, most beach houses are raised up. So downstairs is he had built like the little studio for the podcast, and where we filmed videos and things. And we were in there one day and we were talking about this, and he just looked at me. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, I think it was his grandfather's toolbox, actual toolbox, was across over on this shelf. So he goes and grabs it, and we're looking at it, and we're like, you reach into it and there's things in there, and we're like, oh my gosh, this would be really cool. What if we had this thing that you could just reach into and grab what you needed when you needed it? Yeah. And that brought on the whole thing. And then we actually did silly commercials where or Facebook ads that we would try to put together in videos where he was pulling up that toolbox and using it as a prop. But that real life object paired with something that we heard on another podcast, just the word itself sort of connected the dots. And it was like the idea was born for the actual, we called it our agent success toolbox. And it was full, and it was like, if you were a real estate agent and you were getting on the phone and you're getting ready to call a for sale by owner listing, you could go into your toolbox and find a list of, scripts to use over the phone from one of our guests on how to overcome objections on the phone. Yep. So you could just literally pick the right tool for when you needed it. And that was the whole concept.
Oh yeah. I love it. And I know it's so funny because like I had already decided I was going to start a podcast, and I wanted to call it the Content Toolbox because of a lot of the things that we do are very tactical in nature. People are always asking about like what tools and what software and how are you doing these things? And I'm like, there's so much more than just that stuff. But so I already wanted to call it the Toolbox. And then when we met at the event where you spoke, sharing this concept, I was just like, mind blown. Like I already am going to call it a toolbox. Why not have a toolbox? I love it.
Right. Yeah. It was as if that message was delivered perfectly for you that day. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that was a cool event. Like I told you the other day when we spoke, I was like standing in front of a Zoom camera, and evidently I was on like a big TV in this room for everybody to watch, and I couldn't see anything. I had no idea what was going on. Then our mutual friend, Eileen, the host, would like jump in front of the screen and go, that's great, Evans, you're doing awesome. And then she'd disappear and I'd keep going. And I was like, this is really weird because I can't see anybody. I hope they're not sleeping right now. So,
no sleeping at all. Yeah, it was awesome. Everybody was furiously scribbling notes. I loved it. So we talked a little bit about it. You talked a little bit about kind of how you came up to that concept here, but do you want to talk about like how you arrived there and then how you're using that now in your business?
Sure. I guess I'll just sort of go back to the beginning of, this relationship with Pat and his podcast. At the time, I was actually a content marketer back before I did that. That was really my specialty as I moved through, and I was like a content marketing strategist consultant for people. And not really funny, but at the time I was doing really well, making a good amount of money. My wife was also working as a general manager for this really nice restaurant in town. And we had a young daughter, like 3, 4 in that range. So it was nice because I got to spend a lot of dad time at home, but we were also exhausted, both of us, because she would come home at like 2, 3 in the morning. Then she would get up bright and early. I mean, she was the one making the biggest sacrifice. I have to admit that, because she would get up on like 5 hours, 4 hours of sleep and start when I started at first thing in the morning. So when I started doing really well, I finally was like, hey, you can stop working now. I'm making, enough with my freelancing, but I got lazy and didn't fill my pipeline. And those of us that know that work in the service business as an agency, a consultant, a coach or whatever, if you don't continually work your, content strategy to bring in leads, you're going to pay the price. And I got lazy, and all of a sudden I had 3 clients at the time, but 2 were paying me a ridiculous amount of money. And then all of a sudden, for specific, like different reasons, one of them was a nonprofit, some things fell through. They had to stop our relationship. Another one did. So then all of a sudden, I've got one person who's paying me enough to basically cover the utilities for the month.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what have I done? I just, brought her home. So the next thing I know, instead of beating myself up again, I was like, okay, I gave myself a day just to be pitiful, basically, and be like, what was wrong with me? Why was I not doing what I've always done? And, kept like people in the pipeline. And it was almost as if it was meant to be, because the next day I got up and I said, okay, I've always gotten clients when I needed them. I've always got the money coming in when I needed them. Never had a problem. So just go do it. And so I got online and I started researching and trying to find some people. And I ran across this post, and it just sort of stuck with me for some reason. It said that somebody was looking for somebody to help write show notes for a podcast. And I was thinking, okay, this is something I might have done 5, 6, 7 years ago, but it was something that I would probably hire somebody out to do now. So I sort of kept going. But then for some reason, I kept like thinking about that post. So I just reached out to him, and it ended up, that was Pat, the host of this podcast, who later became my business partner. And we met. And the funny thing is that all my clients have never been in person at this point. Like I had clients in Australia, all over the world, but I'd never met anybody. Out of all the people, all of a sudden this job post, when I reach out to him, turns out I live in Charleston, South Carolina, which is a peninsula. I'm on the north side. It turns out he's on the south side of the river. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we live in the same area. So we met at first. And this is a good tip for anybody who's going out to meet with a client. Don't believe what they say in the job posting. Don't believe that that's really what they want, because a lot of times they don't know what they want. Right. So actually we sat down together and hit it off immediately, but I kept asking him, like, why do you, what's the story here? Because at first it was like, my wife is tired of writing the show notes. She says she's quitting, and I can't fire her. I can't like tell her no, she's my wife. So I got to have somebody to do these. All I want to do is do the podcast. I just want to talk and interview people. And I was like, okay, we can do that. But I was like, but why do you really want to do this? And we kept digging. And first it was like, well, my audience growth is stagnant. I'm not growing. I'm getting frustrated. Then we kept going. I felt like my daughter always did, like the why. And we got to the point where he said, I just want to get my message out to share, to be able to change people's lives the way I changed my life by learning the things I learned, so they can have more freedom to spend with their family. And he's like, and I've got all these ideas for digital courses that will teach other agents the tips and the tricks and the things that I learned along the way that will help them do that. And I was like, okay, there we have it. I was like, now we've got a plan, because we've got a way to monetize this thing. Because I mean, he had been in business for a long time. I knew he was an entrepreneur. He had always been, he's like, I've never actually worked for a W-2 in my life. I've always been an entrepreneur, but he knew nothing about online marketing. He just knew that his podcast was sort of a labor of love at the time, but he also knew that he wouldn't be able to do it forever if he didn't start making money on it. Yeah. So that's how we sort of got into it. And we went from growing the podcast first, because I started looking at it. You'll appreciate this coming from the content side. I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I've never worked with a podcast. So I approached it like I always did with my other clients, with their blogs, with their websites. I was like, let's create content and figure out a way to use that content to drive people to your podcast to listen to it. So we'll use written content, we'll use social media, we'll use email swipe files, we'll use everything we can that's sort of in my content toolbox at the time to use to help grow that. And so that was step one. And then to get to the actual sort of toolbox part, that was when the next problem was, okay, we've got this big, massive audience we've grown now. Because we literally, with the plan I put together, within 3 months, we had moved that podcast from, almost being shut down because the audience growth wasn't there. He was fluctuating between like 6,000 and 7,000 listeners a month, which is still really good.
Yeah.
But we bumped it up to about 75,000 monthly listeners by using that content strategy.
That's incredible.
And then within 6 more months, we got into 150,000 plus average monthly listeners. But during that progress, that's when we ran into that whole situation, was like, nobody wants a stinking newsletter, because we've got
right.
75,000 monthly downloads, and we're getting like 2 email opt-ins a week, and that's just not going to cut it. So that's how we sort of got to the next step and ran across that toolbox idea. So I had this discussion with somebody yesterday. It was like, I'm known now as doing this whole thing, like putting together this blueprint to grow a 7-figure podcast, and everybody sees that. But what I explained to them, I was like, it was pieced together almost like walking up a mountain. Like we were climbing, like we started here, did this, then it was all out of necessity, every step. And then at the end, things looked great, and everybody sees that now, but they don't see all the failure and all the journey and the steps that we took along the way. Mm-hmm. So long story there, but sorry. I wanted to sum up the whole thing for you.
Well, I mean, and that's the truth. Like, that's how we approach things in business. It's like, okay, I'm going to try this. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's shift. Oh, okay, that part worked. All right, cool. What's the next problem? Like, yeah. And that's exactly what you did. And that's why it works.
Yeah. And it was, somebody said this recently, I can't remember who it was. They're talking about how entrepreneurship is like one of the biggest personal growth journeys that we go on, and it really is, because I went from this guy who had, I've been in the business. I went and looked at it. My first business I started almost 20 years ago online. I built an e-commerce type store, which at the time I didn't even know what e-commerce was. And there was no eBay. There was no Amazon. In fact, I had this big clunky heavy machine that used to sit in my house that I'd have to run credit card numbers through, because that was back when you didn't have Stripe or things like that.
Right.
But all through those years, I picked up skills and I learned things along the way. But then when I got in this environment, it was a much different beast, because I went from just being, okay, I'm the guy who always runs the show, and I can, I'll make sure to get you the right content. I'll help build you a website. I'll help do this. That was me in the content marketing strategy consultant, sort of freelance service provider, to now all of a sudden I found myself as like this entrepreneur guy who had partnered with this person, even before we actually had a legal partnership. It was almost like a partnership anyway, because I had gotten to the point where I was like, this is what I'm working on, because it's feeding the family, it's doing good, I don't have to worry about anything else.
Yeah.
But learning along the way things like, okay, first we're a team of me, him, and one VA in the Philippines who would get the podcast uploaded. Then all of a sudden we start bringing on other team members, and now it's like, okay, Evans is now learning how to be the operations manager, the guy who's running the team, and all these things that I just never expected to do. Yep. And it was tough, for me specifically, being like this independent person who always took everything on. And I still did that. And I feel like, I've learned over time where I was like, I wish I could go back now. I would have been such a better manager of that team, because I would have trusted them so much more than I did, instead of thinking that everything has to go through me to make it work right, But it was one of those things that I just had to learn and adjust as we went. But it was a total personal development journey.
Oh, it so is. And that's funny. Like I'm actually going to jump right to that question, because it's one of my favorite questions to ask right here on the podcast, but like, it's always so surprising. And now that I've teed it up, but here, let's ask a leading question. But I do always like to ask, like, what is one of the most surprising things that's happened to you since you started your business? Like,
well, and I'll tell you the biggest, probably one, I left that business, so that was a couple years ago when that business was taken off. We were doing really great. And I had this sort of calling when we mutual thing. It was probably the same one you and I were at, Funnel Hacking Live, ClickFunnels event. And I went with my business partner, but as we were there, it sort of opened my eyes to a different type of entrepreneurship, because a lot of times before that, it was always about, how do we hit this data point? How do we get X amount of visitors to the site? How do we hit this revenue point? How do we, it was really driven by numbers and things. And then when we got to that, and I started hearing people speak, and I was like, they were talking about, creating a movement, changing people's lives, impacting others and things like that. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it just really, it was like I had light bulb moments. And at that point, I felt sort of like that proverbial tap on the shoulder and this voice saying, you need to do more than what you're doing and be bigger than what you are. And I realized I was working with somebody who was very impact driven. That sort of opened my eyes to what I had too. I was like, okay, Pat, the host of this podcast, he is very much an impact driven entrepreneur. I just never looked at it through that lens before.
Right.
And I was like, if we can take what we're doing and helping change people's lives for the better, and I can take that and multiply it by like 100 other people, that would be awesome. But to do that, I have to leave this journey that I'm on now that's actually going, because we went from zero to $500,000 in 12 months, and we were on an upwards trajectory. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, by the way, I want to go now and do my own thing. So that, and that point in itself, I sort of buttoned things up. We had a nice system at this point. And here's where I learned, I was like, I should have trusted more, because when I left, their system kept running like clockwork. And he was very cool with me leaving. Pat actually, when we sat down, I had this conversation in my head for like 2 weeks before I ever actually got to meet him in person, because he was on a trip at the time. Yeah. And of course, I was going through these imaginary scenarios, the worst case scenarios in my head, like, he's going to hate me, I'm burning this to the ground, blah, blah, blah. We sat down and met. And when I told him what I wanted to do, he just looked at me, he's like, how can I help? And I was like, all of a sudden I felt so relieved. But then also he's like, but can I ask you a favor? Can you stick around for like 2 more months just to make sure everything's in place so it'll keep going and everybody can keep their positions? And I was like, yeah, let's do that. And so they actually kept growing and doing great after I left. And he ended up being able to sell the podcast in the business. So we took what was just basically, an idea for a podcast and turned it into a scalable, sellable business, which was like a nice thing. But going back to the actual point, I had to sort of tee it up for you. So I left, right? So that's been the biggest surprise, is when I left, the biggest change has been that I spent the first 6 or 7 months sort of like, what am I doing? I don't want to just chase the first thing that comes my way, because next thing you know, I'll find myself 3 years down the road once again saying I didn't take that message that was given to me and run with it.
Right.
So during that time, I spent a lot of time like just working on myself. Basically, morning routine with meditation and taking better care of myself, doing all these things. And that has been the most surprising thing, is how much it has changed me as a person by sort of getting out of my comfort zone, because I could have easily stayed there and we would have just kept making money and making money and making money. And who knows where it would be now, but it was time for me to go. But usually, in most other cases when I was younger, I probably would have stayed, but I just followed that intuition. So I'm thinking, what am I doing? I got a wife and a kid, a young daughter. But the thing that made it all worthwhile is one day when to be honest, I had a lot of stress, a lot of short-temperedness, all these things before, lack of patience. And then after that, sort of jumping through that comfort zone, going for what I wanted to go for, spending that time to focus on myself and work on myself. One day my daughter came up to me and she was like, Daddy, I just wanted to tell you, there's like, you don't get angry anymore. And I really like that. And I was like, this is all worth it. I don't care if we're broke. That alone was the best reward.
That's amazing.
So it's really been a chance. That's been the biggest surprise, is not business, not, where the company's going or what I'm doing now. It was that change in me, like being more open and honest and talking to people about what went on in my past with like family things and personal things, forgiving people in my life, forgiving myself for being such a mess up, screw up for a long time. But it's all part of, the journey. And I spoke with another podcaster one day, Cesar Espino, who's this amazing entrepreneur, has a great story. And he mentioned at some point, that life, everything we get is a gift. It's just how we look at it. And if we take that and keep learning from it and building on it. So I started looking at everything that way. So it's been just a total eye-opening change in my life and my business.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that story. And yeah, it's, I love that. It really is all about the personal transformations, the things that happen to us as a person, which ultimately ends up helping, but like we never expected it.
And this is what I loved. I told you because of, you had a workshop one time and went through, and it's stories like that. And when I tell them, and then now I can actually go back and pull pieces out of them and build them in, I can tell a long story, but now you've given me the tools to actually take pieces of those and turn them into like epics now. But, I learned a lot from that, and it's been really helpful because it's stories and telling and getting our message out there is like, it's our gift. It's what we have, and we need to share it with others. So I think through content and through stories and messaging, and that's why I like podcasts so much, is because people just speak and share their message, and anybody can do it. The technology's there now for anybody and everybody. Everybody has something inside of them to give that they can offer. And maybe it just affects one person, or maybe it affects 10,000 people. But no matter how many people you affect, you create a ripple effect throughout, everybody. So you've got to get out there and share it. So that's one thing I love about content, whether it's written, message, written, audio, video, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting your story out there in front of other people, connecting with humans.
Yes, definitely. And that's something I never really did in the past. I was happy being the guy behind the screen and helping you grow your business. And now I've found it so much more rewarding and, just enlightening to myself and to people around me to go out and, be more out there while still helping and serving other people.
Exactly. All right. So perfect tee up. So let's talk about, so where you started, and then you started that business, and then you left. You went through a lot of personal growth. So let's talk about what you're doing now and how you're using that messaging in your business.
Yeah. Well, what I'm doing now is basically taking everything I learned from that experience with that business and how we, grew the audience, got the message out, built what he liked to call like a virtual ATM out of the business. It was an automated business, but it was from what I like to think of it. And here's the thing that I really like. He said that, but then the other day I listened to, because I was putting together this case study, client case study video, and I went and listened to that. And that's always been sort of like one of those hooks. Yeah. Like, Evans made my company into a virtual ATM, and it catches people's attention. But then here's the thing is I always sort of got caught on that hook, but then I've heard it so many times that I listened past that. And just a few sentences later, he says, he says the virtual ATM, but then he says, it was to the point where I could do what I loved. All I had to do was share my message and get it out there through the podcast, which is what I wanted to do all along. And now I had a business and a system that supported that. So I was like, okay, that's really the rewarding part. He could do what he loved and not worry about the money coming in, the leads being generated, all that kind of stuff. So I take that system and now I use that. I do coaching for other entrepreneurs. And I like to work with entrepreneurs who have big positive messages and missions, people that want to impact, that want to contribute, and a lot of those types of entrepreneurs still feel like, okay, I'm doing this thing and it's really I want to go serve other people and help other people, but they don't really step into their greatness like they could if they got their message out there and had a whole system in place so they could do what they love. Yeah. So I basically take that, that entire podcast system from, audience growth to lead generation, lead capturing, and monetization. And now I coach and teach others how to do that. So it's been fun. So I tell everybody, it's it's four C's, but then somebody added another one on it, and I'm like, now I got to change all my messaging. But I like to call it 4 C's of connection, right? So you're connecting with other people, cultivating, where you're cultivating trust and belief in these people through your messaging, through your podcast.
Yep.
Then convert, where it's not salesy, your content's doing the converting, and your funnel is doing the converting, your toolbox is doing the converting for you, because everything has been built in the front end to create that trust and that belief and that transformation ahead of time. And then the last one is contribute, where you go in, you work with them to contribute to that transformation. Whether, I like to teach people to do more of a high ticket premium service, because I think that's how we can serve people at the highest level, by going that route. And then, of course, my co-founder, I have a business that I've co-founded called My Podcast Coach. She comes in and she's like, don't forget collaborate. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. Because then when they hit that huge success point, a lot of times you end up collaborating, or they collaborate to your success by referring people to you.
Yeah.
Because she was saying, I don't even go out. She has an agency, and she gets all her clients from referral, because she does such an amazing job with all the things before you ever hit that. So I was like, now I got to go back and change all my messaging and figure out how I add the 5th C into this 4C. I used to call it the core 4. And now it's like, okay, the core 5, that doesn't quite sound the same.
Still works.
But it is true though. If you think about it, if you follow that step, and especially at the end, if you work, a lot of people stop where the sale stops.
Yeah.
And after they're converted into a client, you need to spend that time to contribute to their success, contribute to their transformation, contribute to getting them that desired result. And then, like she said, they will collaborate to help your business be a success, because they'll start being your biggest, fan, and telling everybody how great you are, and just sending people to you. Mm-hmm. And I actually would see that in person with Pat, like in our business, where people would come up to us at events and just, gush like he was some kind of rock star. And he was like, what, did I interview that guy? And I'm like, no, he just is a listener and loves us. And he came in the toolbox, he bought our thing, and you've helped change his life, So I got to see it in person, which was really cool. And it was really inspiring for me to go on and do that and help others do that too.
That's amazing. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So, okay, before I jump off of this then, so if people want to know more about My Podcast Coach, where can they go find some info on that?
Well, we have a Facebook group that is really cool for them. If they want to join that, it's called My Podcast Coach. They can come over and check that out. It's on Facebook. And then I actually have a case study too, a client case study with Pat, where I do some training in it on the actual steps that we sort of covered through this, but a little more in depth, that you can watch it and go on and start implementing it in your business. But you can go watch that, and that's free. Then you can, actually have a button in there. I like to tell everybody, hey, if you click that button, you can book a call to talk to me, and we can figure out if I can help you. If not, no big deal. We can just connect at least. Yep. But you can go get that at dreamclientsforlife.com/Pat. So it's dreamclientsforlife.com/Pat. Yeah.
Okay. We'll make sure that link is in the show notes here. Perfect. All right. So you mentioned, I just want to get like tactical here on some of the things that you're doing using the communication, kind of how the path works, on how you're finding people, and then how you're bringing them in and for the conversions.
Well, podcasts for one, Facebook groups, always great. And these are all things that I did previously. So I'm sort of living by my own, medicine, I guess, or whatever the saying. I don't know. I'm not good at sayings. I just make stuff up. But I just sort of add to the sayings and make them my own at some point. And my daughter's always like, that doesn't even make sense, Daddy. I'm like, I know it doesn't, but just go with it. But yeah, so the basically, going on podcasts, that's like one of my favorite things. And this popped in my head the other day in a discussion. And now I've sort of coined the term. I was like, it's now mine. I own it. It's OPA, other people's audiences, but I like to use other people's audiences, especially if you are for those people that are listening that are just starting out on this journey. Maybe they had this idea and they want to follow it now, which I truly encourage you to do. You can get really bogged down on, well, nobody's listening. I don't have, it's going to take me a year to grow my email list and this and that. But there are so many opportunities right now for you to go do Facebook Lives with other people, to go on podcasts as a great guest, get good at being a guest. We show people too, like how to actually find the right podcasts that match up with your ideal audience so that you're not wasting your time. So you can go sort of start bringing some of those people from that pond into yours. Yeah. But go into Facebook groups, give a lot of value. Don't always, the biggest thing I think that I would tell people, if you can start serving without expectation of gaining from it, it'll come back faster than you can believe. And it might take a little longer than you wanted, but just be consistent with it. And doing anything content, like you and I know from our discussions, I shared with you how we grew our podcast audience. And one of those ways was by using other people's audiences. We wrote written content for articles, for blogs, for other people's blogs that already had the audience. And we embedded our podcast player, our episode, right into that content so people could click it and listen right there. But it wasn't on our own blog because we built that in the background. But in the meantime, we went to other people's audiences first that we connected with and could serve them with value. Yeah. So I would say that's like one of the biggest ways. Those are probably two of my favorites, is going out written content wise, embedding that content, whether it's, I'm getting ready to work with somebody now who's in like the parenting space. And that's one of my things is like, do you realize how many mommy bloggers are out there that would probably love to have your content? If you can provide them an awesome article that will save them the time from having to create all that content, they've already got the audience. Go reach out to them, provide some value, get your article on their blog in front of their 100,000 already, people that are subscribed. Plant your podcast episode right in there. And even better yet, interview them for that podcast episode. So then you're putting them and their voice in that episode right on their own blog, delivering value. But people are going to click that. They're going to listen. They're going to go, oh, I'm going to go subscribe to that podcast now. So between that and going on other people's podcasts as a guest, I think those are probably the two biggest ways to start attracting an audience, whether you've already been in the business for a while or if you're just brand new.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic tips. Thank you so much, Evans. All right. So you guys, Evans has also created this really cool guide that he's going to share with us in our toolbox. So Evans, what was the name of that guide again? Or like, what are they going to get from that one? You don't have to give us
I'll give you, I won't read the tongue twister of it. I'm good at like writing these tongue twisting titles, but no, it's basically 5 steps on how to turn your podcast into a high ticket sales machine. It's for coaches and course creators, experts, change making entrepreneurs, but it goes through. It's not fluff. It actually gives some tactical steps. It gives you why you want to do some of these things so you can say, okay, this is worth it. And here's how to do some of these things. It gives you 5 steps you can start doing right now. And here's the crazy thing is that you could probably read this even if you don't have a podcast and apply it to your other content marketing as well. You can find ways and parallels because a lot of it comes, like I mentioned earlier, from my background in the written content world. Yep. So it's more, as you and I know, tactics are great, but the principles, the overarching principles that work on every level and every niche, those are the things that if you start learning those, then you're really going to change your business.
Absolutely. So make sure you guys go check it out. Like go get into the content toolbox area and grab that guide. I can tell you that we will be doing it, and I will make sure that my team is also reading along and following along. So it'll become new things we implement as well, because we have a toolbox because of Evans.
I know. I'm loving that now. I really do. It makes me feel proud to see other people doing it and other people doing it better And we have another mutual friend who does this too, Lizanne.
Yeah.
And I started looking at her stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, now I got to start learning. I taught her the toolbox. Now I got to learn from her how she's doing it, because it's even better.
So great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you too, like I love getting your emails. It's really cool to see this stuff and to see it working better than how we ever did it. It was just sort of an idea that we sparked, but now to see other people taking it and run with it and grow their businesses with it and doing it better, I think that's like even more rewarding.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's awesome, because we all can just keep learning and just keep improving. So
yeah,
take those little tidbits.
Be collaborative, not competitive.
Exactly. Absolutely. All right. Any final parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Well, I will say this, this is something that I've had a lot of discussions with people around lately, and it goes back to when you said, what's the biggest thing that maybe the biggest change you've had and all this, and it's becoming your authentic self and not being afraid to be your authentic self is going to be one of the biggest factors to your success, because being that authentic self is, one, going to make you have no competition because you're you and nobody else is you. But two, it's going to shine through your content, whether that's written content, whether it's video content, whether it's a podcast. And sort of like what I loved when you mentioned when we were going to do this podcast interview, it's like, hey, let's just go with it and talk and have a conversation. And I think that brings out the true authentic discussion that needs to be had, that's sort of, in the netherworld, and it comes to life by not being, inauthentic, by basically just saying, hey, we're just going to go with it and, be yourself and let it happen. So I think that's probably the best advice. If I could give myself some advice 10 years back in time, it wouldn't be some tactic, some strategy or shortcut. It would be like, just be your authentic self, and do that, and you'll be fine. You'll succeed. Yeah.
So true. Amazing words of wisdom. And if we could only go back 10 years and do that to ourselves.
Right. I probably wouldn't, knowing me, I wouldn't learn the lesson anyway. I'd be like, oh, shut up, guy. I'm not listening to you.
I know. It takes me like 10 times to be beat over the head. I'm like, oh, wait, I think maybe.
Yes. You and I are birds of a feather in that regard then. Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Well, okay, you guys, I know we've taken plenty of Evan's time here. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And you guys make sure that you go to the content toolbox to get Evan's guide, and go to, what's the URL one more time for the case study?
dreamclientsforlife.com/Pat.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that link is right here included as well. But
great.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much. And everyone, really appreciate it. Check out all the amazing resources and things that are in the toolbox. Cool.
Definitely. Thanks. Go get that toolbox. You won't regret it, I'm sure. So I appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Awesome. Thanks, Evans.